Ooh. Okay. Is that good? Sounds good to me. Isn't it the 8th? It's the 8th. Yeah, it's the 8th. Yeah, it is. My parents come pretty soon. My parents will come in pretty soon at the end of the month.
Oh, good. How long are they staying?
About a week.
Well, I thought they were coming at the end of the month.
They are. That's what I'm saying. They're coming at the end of this month. Yeah. They're coming on Reformation Day,
Oh, all right.
which is Halloween.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I call it Reformation Day because I'm like,
The Lutherans do too.
yeah. Well, that makes sense because that was the day Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses.
They all, I went to a Lutheran church and all of them wore red jackets.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know what it was symbolize.
I don't know. Probably something. Last year, I'll tell you this and then we can begin. So last year we had a young adult youth Reformation party, and we're going to do that again this year, the Monday, which is the day before the 31st. And last year we had a lot of fun. Instead of doing like pin the tail on the donkey, we had like nail the 95 Theses to the door. And it was up there for a couple of months, if you guys remember, the 95 Theses. Now it's on the back of my office door. Abby Brill printed it up, and so yeah. And we watched a movie about Martin Luther, like a 25-minute like movie about it, and so it was a lot of fun. So yeah, we do. All right, so let me hand out this stuff. Do you guys each want one, or do you guys want to share? Okay, I'm gonna hand you guys a couple of other things because you guys are new. All right, stand and introduce yourselves. No, I'm just kidding. Are you sure? Are you? All right. I think there's like 4 of these. I can give you guys each one of these. In fact, I want to because then it'll go down. Okay, here's one for you, Chris. And I'm going to give you guys, this is a biblical timeline. So we're doing the Old Testament. All right. But if you keep this, then I won't have to give it to you guys next semester too. When we finish the Old Testament. This semester we're only doing Genesis. I say semester because I'm in school terms. But we're going Genesis to about the end of 2 Samuel, about to possibly the divided monarchy. It just depends on how much we're able to get done. So here's a map. This is Exodus and the Wanderings. This one is just the Old Testament world. And then this one, oh, here we go. Here's Table of the Nations. And then this one is Canaan during the time of the patriarchs. Now, we are in the middle of the story of Moses. I've already done the story of Moses, but we're doing the law right now. That's what this week we're talking about, is the law. So. All right, I think I got you guys everything. All right, and I gave you guys the 10 Commandments. So, there we go. All right. I'm going to pray, and then we are going to begin. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that we're able to learn about your word. I just ask that you give us wisdom, you give us understanding as we study your word, that we study and try to understand the foundation of the law. Please bless this teaching and help us apply it in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. So, as I said, last week we talked about Moses. So we're talking Exodus to Deuteronomy. This week, we're talking about the law, and then next week, we're going to talk about the tabernacle. All right, so I handed you guys out the 10 Commandments because obviously that's part of the law, so we're going to go over those. So, let's talk about the law. So what is the law? In Hebrew, the word for law is Torah. Most of you guys probably know that. Yet, what we think of the Torah can have different meanings sometimes. Sometimes it can refer to the first 5 books of the Bible, or the Pentateuch, as it's called. In fact, that's actually one of the names that we give the first 5 books of the Bible, is actually called the Pentateuch. In Hebrew scripture, the Pentateuch is called the Torah. And that means then that the word Torah can actually be described as narrative within the giving of the law, considering the fact that there is narrative, obviously, within the first 5 books. And then sometimes Torah can actually refer to specific laws within the full idea of the Mosaic Law, or even possibly one specific law. And it can also refer to the complete Mosaic Law, or the complete commands and regulations given to the nation of Israel by Yahweh. So as you can see up there, it says Pentateuch, narrative within the law, specific law or specific laws, and then also the complete Mosaic Law. So that's what the Torah can actually represent. The word Torah can actually represent. I'm going to turn down the AC just for a moment. It's getting hot where I'm standing. Oh, really? That's fine. Here, you can take this and you can teach. You can just follow these notes. I'm going to have a lot of questions for you. So that's what the Torah can describe. Now, for our context, we're thinking more about the commands and the regulations given to Israel by their God, although it is possible that some of the other definitions may come through. And I'll be referring mainly to the laws governing the nation of Israel, the laws that separate them from other nations, and through obedience, their attempts to make them holy. The commands, or the beginning of the law, really begins in Exodus 20, and it goes all the way to the end of Deuteronomy. That's usually when you think of the commands and regulations, from Exodus 20 to the end of Deuteronomy. There are over 600 commandments in the Torah. That's what's counted out to be, around 600 commandments. Now, within the Torah, there are 4 main collections of law codes. The first collection, and I'm going to go over these separately, so you don't need to, that's the reason why I didn't put them up there, is because we're going to go over them separately so you guys can write them down. So the first collection would include the 10 Commandments in the Book of the Covenant, and that's from Exodus 20 to 23. The second collection discusses the laws of the tabernacle, and that's from Exodus chapter 25 to Exodus 40. And then the third collection are the laws of Leviticus, which is Leviticus 1 through 27, which I'm fairly positive is actually the entire book of Leviticus. And then the fourth collection, those are the laws of Deuteronomy, and those are mainly Deuteronomy chapter 12 to 26. So we're going to discuss each of these separately today, and then next week I'm going to say even more about the tabernacle, okay? And that eventually, what I say about the tabernacle, that's going to connect with the temple later on in our study. So let's talk first about the 10 Commandments in the Book of the Covenant. That's the overall section, but right now let's just talk about mainly the 10 Commandments, and then we'll move into the Book of the Covenant, even though they're technically one law collection. So the term 10 Commandments is not found within the Bible, actually. The Old Testament refers to them as the 10 words, or Decalogue, and you can actually see this in Exodus 34:28. Except that I can't find it. There we go. All right, Exodus 34:28. So he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread or drink water. and he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, now it's actually going to say 10 Commandments, but it really, and I'm going to explain why it says that. Then it says the 10 Commandments. All right, and then in Deuteronomy 4:13, and I'm going to explain why it says 10 Commandments, even though that's technically not the literal term. So Deuteronomy 4:13 says, he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, that is the 10 Commandments, and he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. And it also says 10 verse 4, and it says he wrote on the tablets, like the former writing, the 10 Commandments, which the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them to me. Now, it's translated as actually commandments, but technically the word translated commandments is from the Hebrew word hadabarim, and that truly is defined as speech or words. Okay, so these are the 10 words that Yahweh has spoken. That's more the literal translation, and that's more likely what the Israelites would have actually referred to them as, the 10 words. And they were written by the finger of God, and you can actually see that again, Deuteronomy 9:10, which I just have to switch a page on this one. The Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone written by the finger of God. And then also in Exodus 31:18, and the reason why they're in Exodus and Deuteronomy, by the way, is because the 10 Commandments is in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. And then also, and so that's why when you're speaking of the 10 Commandments, you go back and forth between those two. Exodus 31:18, which it also says, when he had finished speaking with him upon Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God. So the 10 Commandments were written by the finger of God. Literally, they're really called the 10 words. And these 10 words were written on 2 stone tablets that were placed into the Ark of the Covenant, which rested in the most holy place of the tabernacle. Now, even though the Bible, literally doesn't call them the 10 Commandments, I'm going to call them the 10 Commandments because we all know what we're talking about. But if you ever hear anyone use the idea 10 words, they're talking about the 10 Commandments because that's more the literal translation, but everyone calls it commandments. So, and I'm pretty sure there's actually notes. If you look at it, it'll probably say sometimes in like a footnote and say words. Sometimes it might actually say that. So, just so you know. So, all right, 10 Commandments. Let's go. So, there are actually mainly 3 places. Well, I shouldn't say mainly, but there are 3 places in the Bible where the 10 Commandments are written down. The first place, as I just said, is Exodus 20, and it's verses 1 through 17, if you want the specific verses, 1 through 17. The second is in Exodus chapter 34, verses 10 through 28, 10 through 28 in Exodus 34. And then the third place is found in Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 through 21. Of the 3 recordings of the 10 words, or 10 commandments, the recordings of Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, they're almost identical. But the Exodus 34 version is much different. In fact, before this study, I'd never actually personally heard of Exodus 34 containing the 10 Commandments, which tells me that it probably is debated on whether or not it should actually truly be considered a version of the 10 Commandments. So I would actually argue that you really only but I guess I should say, I would only argue that there are really only 2 versions of the 10 Commandments that are found in the Bible, and they're almost identical, which would be Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Although what is said in Exodus 34 is why people will say that it's is another version of the 10 Commandments, because it does mention it in Exodus 34, but if you read the chapter, it doesn't look at all like Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, which is why I would argue it probably isn't really a version of the 10 Commandments of what we would think of. So, now, what's unique about the 10 Commandments is that they are concise or absolute laws. All right, they're not conditional, except the law of honoring your father and mother. So this means that the consequences against these laws are probably death, And you do see that within the conditional laws or case laws later in the Torah. An example is you can view the consequences of murder in the case laws, and it's death, like in Leviticus 24:17, which, believe it or not, I actually turned right there the first time. If a man takes the life of any human being, he shall surely be put to death. Right? It gives the consequence of what happens if you break the law, while in the Ten Commandments it just says, do not murder, right, or do not kill, depending on the translation. So, now, the Ten Commandments are also unique, not just in the fact that they are concise or absolute laws, but they are also the only laws given to man directly by God and not through human agency. Right? God himself wrote the 10 words. Right? We said he wrote it, right? The finger of God. Well, the rest of the Torah is actually given to the nation of Israel through Moses. So it's also unique in that way. So it's not just absolute, but it's also the only one given to mankind directly from God. Now, there are also a few numbering systems to the Ten Commandments. So the Jewish people, the Roman Catholics, and the Lutherans, they treat the laws against the worship of other gods and idolatry as one commandment. The Roman Catholics then and the Lutherans will divide up the prohibition against coveting into distinct parts. And this makes the commandments, of course, equal 10. We would most likely separate the worship of other gods and idolatry as 2 commandments, and then the prohibition against coveting as 1 commandment. So in each cases, they both equal 10. It's just a little bit different of division of the 10 commandments, of where the first one ends, where the second one begins, things like that.
So did they have different times?
Yes. Say that again?
I thought you said the Lutherans besides the Catholics.
Yeah, so it's the Jewish people, the Roman Catholics, and the Lutherans. They would divide up what we would think of as the first 2 into 1.
I know that the Jewish people and the Catholics have a different time. I thought the Lutherans pretty much use the same Bible.
I think they do, but that doesn't mean that how they're interpreting it would be the same, even if they use the same Bible that we have.
The old Midwestern way of saying was Lutheran the backdoor Catholic. Now, where that's, but I grew up with that slogan, Lutheran the backdoor Catholic.
Yeah, they're about the most Catholic Protestants you can get. Some of them. Some of them too, yeah. But I mean, Lutheran, like Martin Luther wasn't actually like completely against the Catholic Church. He was actually trying to reform the Catholic Church, not actually really make a split. So, but anyway, so that's how they number it. Okay, we would do obviously their version of the first commandment in 2 commandments, and then when they would separate the covenant into 2 commandments, we would just put it into 1. So it's also important to note that many scholars view the first 4 commandments as defining how mankind should have a right relationship with God, and then with the 4th commandment, keeping the Sabbath, pointing back to the relationship with God, but then also pointing to a good life within the community. And then the last 6 laws deal with relationships within the community and how to properly treat one another. So that is the 10 Commandments. And if you would permit me, which you have to because I have the microphone, I'm actually going to read, I want to read it, if you don't mind. I'm going to read the Exodus 20, 1 through 17, because I just want us to hear it. I'm going to do it in the original Hebrew. No, I'm just kidding. I can't do it that well. So, and if you want, you can look at the 10 Commandments that I gave you. You can kind of follow along. So, I'm going to start in, obviously, verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, and it's important to note, God is actually speaking here. Okay? He is actually speaking here. So, you really have to pay attention to what he's saying, because this has a lot of ramifications in different other theologies. For instance, when you get to the Sabbath day, that commandment, when he's speaking about how he created the world in 6 days, that actually goes back to the doctrine of creation, right? So when people want to say evolution exists or there's a gap theory, this verse, spoken literally by God, disproves both of those ideas. Otherwise, they'd have to call God a liar. So it's important to know that he really is speaking this physically. So he says, I am the Lord your God, or I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Those are the 10 Commandments. And even today, we still really should be following these. Now, after the 10 Commandments, you immediately have the Book of the Covenant. All right, and the title of this section actually comes from Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, and I'm going to read that. It says, Then he took the Book of the Covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. All right, so the title of it is found in Exodus 24, verse 7, but the whole section from all the material is actually between Exodus chapter 20, verse 22 to chapter 23, verse 33. Okay, even though, strangely enough, the title of it actually comes after that. But it's associated with the 10 Commandments, which is why it falls within that collection of the 10 Commandments, which is why the collection is called 10 Commandments in the Book of the Covenant. And with the inclusion of the 10 Commandments, these laws are all the ones that were ratified or given at Sinai. Thus, the first collection of laws was given at Mount Sinai. The laws within the Book of the Covenant cover a variety of topics that will deal with civil issues or ritual issues or moral issues. And with the 10 Commandments, a major theme is also the worship of Yahweh as the one and true God. So that's the 10 Commandments in the Book of the Covenant. All right, now we move on to the next collection. Is everyone done copying up there? Looks like we need water. Yeah, could you get me some water, Larry? That'd be nice. You were the water boy? That's why he's so spry. No, you just keep him running around, don't you, Gene? Yeah. I'll wait for him. That way I don't go on ahead. Any questions that you guys have about the Ten Commandments or the Book of the Covenant before Larry comes back? No? All right. I really love the Ten Commandments. I think they're really fascinating.
Which one do you suppose is broken the most?
All of them? Well, here's the thing. The first one, right, or the first two, if you want to say, right, you shall have no other gods before me. That one is broken almost daily by almost every single person, because every time you sin, you're automatically putting yourself before God. Right, so before you even get to any other sin, you automatically break that one. Thank you.
More speed for the broiler.
Yeah. And then, in a sense, by doing that, you could argue that you're automatically then worshiping yourself because you're putting yourself before God and you're doing what you want to do. So you could make the argument that before you sin, you automatically break the first two commandments. Right? Taking the Lord's name in vain, I mean, that one's obviously broken many times by unsaved people. I think for saved people, outside of the first two,
They say though, even in singing a hymn, if you're not paying attention and you're using the Lord's name.
yeah, that's true. If you're singing a hymn and, I'm sorry?
And daydreaming.
Yeah, and daydreaming, you could be doing that. Or if you're also singing a song that isn't actually theologically accurate, and you actually don't realize it, you could, in some sense, be taking the Lord's name in vain. Because then you're not actually singing and praising the true God. So even if it's on accident, you still technically could be doing it. It'd just be an ignorant sin, but it's still technically true. Which is why me and Abby, sometimes you'll watch us, sometimes we don't sing songs. And it's because some of the modern songs are either written by people that aren't really Christian, even though they claim to be Christian, and so we don't want to support that. Or we know the song, even in one instance, might be theologically inaccurate, and so we're like, well, we don't want to give cause to, possibly take the Lord's name in vain, so we don't want to do that. Because Jesus said you have to worship in spirit and in truth, and so if the song isn't theologically accurate, it's then not truth, which means you can't worship in truth. And so it really does connect. But I would say the one that sometimes a lot of people probably break and they don't even realize it is remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Right? We're supposed to have a day of rest, and in America that's really, really hard. Now, obviously, everyone's rest is kind of different. Mine is a Saturday, and that's just because, obviously, as a pastor, you usually work on Sunday, so it really can't be your Sabbath day. So mine's mainly Saturday, and I'll just read, watch football. I don't really do that much. I mean, obviously, every now and then, if I have to do yard work or something, but I kind of find that a little bit relaxing every now and then, so it's not really that much of a work for me. But that one, especially with the American culture, Christians can break that one almost all the time because they'll just keep working and working and working and not realize that they're actually supposed to have a break, and they really are then breaking a commandment, which means they're breaking a law and they're sinning. Right, exactly. Yeah, in fact, ministers are sometimes the worst ones that actually do that because they never actually take a break, and they're supposed to. They forget that the church life, the ministry, right, is actually not your main ministry. Your first ministry for a pastor is actually your family, which means you're supposed to take a break and actually spend time with your family. And that's actually what the Bible even says to do. So a lot of ministers, especially in the bigger churches, I would imagine a lot of them break this commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, quite a bit. Now, obviously, every now and then, sometimes there's just multiple things that happen in a week at a church, right? So almost every single day, you have something because you're preparing the sermon, you're doing some kind of Bible study or something, and then, unfortunately, someone passes away, and that Saturday is the funeral. Obviously, there's no going around that.
You should have used the wedding instead.
Maybe a wedding. Okay, that works too. Unfortunately, there's a wedding.
You could
No.
schedule a wedding,
Yeah.
a death.
But a wedding.
Either way. Well, I mean, I use funeral because that was in my mind because one of the pastors that I was an intern at in Kansas City, he had a week like that. He had, in fact, he may have even had, I think, like 2 funerals that week and maybe even like a wedding. And so he really wasn't able to have a break at all. And sometimes you just have a week like that. But that isn't to say that that was always what he always did, right? He normally took like half the Friday off and had Saturday off. But
Well, I remember as a kid, in Des Moines, everything shut down on Sunday.
mhm.
And I can remember when they opened up the grocery store across the street from our church on
Mhm.
Sunday, and the church just went ballistic. And they claimed it because they were breaking the Sabbath, but I think it was because we were using their parking lot for church. That's maybe cynical.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I can remember, and you get back to the Midwest, I don't know how it is now, but when we were kids, Sunday was shut down.
Yeah.
It was that way in California.
Mhm. Yeah. It's changed, but
Well, it's not now.
yeah.
No, no, but it changed in the sixties.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, all of them are broken all the time. I mean, by various people. But I think also another really hard one is actually don't covet. And we're going to talk about this later, but coveting is also a unique one in the 10 because it's the only one that's not necessarily action oriented, it's more mind oriented. And so the other ones, obviously, I mean, you could probably say that with 5 as well, honor your father and mother. You know, in a sense, it's obviously mind oriented, but it still has an action part to it. Coveting is almost all in the mind, right? It's all about the emotion, it's all about that. And so, and then you actually would go do something, and that's usually when you might, commit adultery or steal, right, or murder. But, yeah.
Those things lead to murder.
Yeah, those things, yeah, exactly. So, I'm pretty sure in Texas for a while, I don't know if it's still a law, but I think you were legally allowed, if you caught like your spouse in the act of adultery, you had the right, I think, to actually shoot the person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually get away with it. Like, if you caught them in the act, I think for a while it was actually legal to do that.
Yeah, it
So,
was,
so,
but that was a long time ago.
yeah, I think it was a long time ago, but,
The sixties, up to the sixties.
yeah.
Early seventies, because I remember dimly reading an article about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, it sounds like something Texas would do. Anyway, all right.
But when the woman caught the husband in adultery, it was a different issue.
Of course it is. Of course. All right. So let's move on to the tabernacle laws. So these laws are based entirely on the Israelites preparing for worship in the tabernacle. The theme is that the tabernacle and all it contains is a place of sanctuary for Yahweh to live among his people. There are 2 main sections of the tabernacle laws. The first section is from Exodus chapter 25 to Exodus chapter 31, and those are God's instructions. And then the second section is how Israel obeyed those instructions, and those are found in Exodus chapter 35 through 40. Now, Exodus 32 to 34, because if you notice, there's like 3 chapters missing in the middle. That's narrative, and so that's why it's not actually included in part of the collection of the tabernacle laws. I mean, it is in a whole, but the 2 main sections are before the narrative and then after the narrative. Although the tabernacle laws do relate to the narrative, and you'll see why in just a moment. So just let me know when you guys are done. Last week I went a little bit fast at the end, and I apologize. I didn't even realize it, and then I was talking with Abby, and she was like, well, last week you looked like you wanted to finish it. You just kept going and going and going really fast. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't even know. I was just going with the flow, and she's like, yeah, you were talking fast at the end, and I was like, oh, my bad. So I'm like, I better slow down this week. Are you guys done? All right. So there are three main topics within these laws. The first topic is the Ark of the Covenant and other symbols of God's presence. The second topic deals with the layout of the tabernacle and its courtyard. And then the third topic of laws deal with the priestly functions. The tabernacle laws have a relationship with the narrative surrounding them. It relates to the presence of God within the cloud that he uses to lead the Israelites. It also relates to the obedience of the Israelites and the glory of God being shown to them, where his presence will be in the tabernacle. It also relates to the story of the golden calf, which is within that narrative in 32 to 34. It relates to that story and how the Israelites disobeyed God and worshipped an idol. The idol was a rival to Yahweh, and it was destroyed. And then the tabernacle laws also relate to the continuing presence of Yahweh. He is present at Sinai, but he is promising to be continually present with the Israelites in the tabernacle. And we will discuss the layout and the importance of the tabernacle next week. And of course, that will connect later in our class when we study the temple. All right. Gene, are you good? Are you guys done? Joanne? You're done? Okay. All right, so like I said, we'll talk more about the tabernacle next week, so this is just a kind of a general one for you guys. Now let's talk about the laws of Leviticus. Exciting book of the Bible. It really is if you actually study it. To read these, by the way, when you're reading some books in the Bible that you find really, really boring, what's good to do is actually get a commentary that's fairly easy to understand and just kind of read along with it, because then you'll actually understand the importance of it and what's actually happening. And that's how I got through like the first time I was reading like the rest of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. I grabbed the Warren Wiersbe commentaries. If you guys know who Warren Wiersbe is, right? I just grabbed his commentaries. They're not the most academic, but they're good at the foundation, right? He's good with a lot of his doctrine. And so while reading those, and they're pretty short, I was able to understand better what was actually happening in between Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and that's how I got through them. So if you ever need help, grab like a Wiersbe commentary or like John MacArthur or something that's kind of simple, and it'll help you actually understand the importance of that book. So just so you know. All right, so these laws, they continue the tabernacle account, and but they are of a wider variety than the tabernacle laws, obviously. And the first section of Leviticus 1 through 16, that's concerned with the rituals, like the sacrifices or the ideas of purity and uncleanness. The second section, 17 through 27, that's broader, and it has more device subjects like sexual behavior, blasphemy, the year of the Jubilee, the sabbatical year, etc. Now, one of the main themes throughout Leviticus, and in all the Torah, actually, is the idea of holiness of God and the holiness of Israel. Leviticus 19:2 says, "Be holy because I, the Lord your God," or Yahweh your God, "am holy."
Has anyone taken these laws here and matched them up with the commandments that they are related to, or is this completely different?
What do you mean?
I have
Like the collections?
I have in my mind the concept that may not be valid,
Mm-hmm.
but that the Ten Commandments are like the Nevada Revised Statutes. It's a law that God passed.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And these are
Mhm.
all like the Nevada Administrative Code.
Right.
Where the priests and the people, Moses and those related those
Mhm.
from the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, the Ten Commandments, sometimes they argue they're more like principle laws, where every kind of case law can go back basically to the Ten Commandments. And that's why I said they're very different than these laws. Because these laws are conditional. They're going to have, like, if you do this, then this is the consequence, right? The Ten Commandments is just straight absolute. Don't do this. Don't do this. But I'm sure some scholar has connected all the Ten Commandments with which specific law it would actually go to. Although it's not complete, because not every law code could necessarily go back to a direct commandment. I mean, a lot of them would just fall under, if you don't do your priestly function and you're sinning, then, you might actually then have another god before them. Or make yourself, by doing such, you kind of made yourself an idol, right? They may not be as specific.
Well, probably.
If that makes sense. Right. But you're right. Some people have considered the Ten Commandments kind of like as a principle or an overarching idea, and then they go more into specific laws. So I'm not saying you're wrong. Yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong.
I was just thinking some scholar might sit down and done it.
There's probably someone out there that did it. It wasn't me, but someone probably did. Wouldn't surprise me. Scholars have a lot of time on their hand, and you have to write a dissertation over something, and it has to be new. So it's like, hey, this hasn't been done. Let's do it. So anyway, holiness. Holiness of God, holiness of Israel. Be holy because I am holy. That's what God said, not me. God is holy, and he is the only being that is truly holy and separate and unique. And because God is holy, Israel is also called to be holy. The law helps separate Israel from the other nations. They're supposed to be set apart. Now, apart from the theme of holiness, there are also three other emphases within Leviticus. First, it is assumed that Israel will not be able to please God, but God will still preserve the covenant even if Israel disobeys and is punished by the exile. And you see this in Leviticus chapter 26, 44 to 45. Yeah, here we go. Yet in spite of this, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, nor will I so abhor them as to destroy them, breaking my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will remember for them the covenant with their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt, in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. So it assumes the people will disobey and go into exile. Consequently, the worship of Israel involves atonement and purification, mainly illustrated by the Day of Atonement, where the high priest once a year offers a sacrifice for the people, and that's found in Leviticus chapter 16. Second, the second other emphasis, Israel can experience God's blessings if they choose to obey his laws and commands. God wants to bless Israel as they obey and live with him. And then third, as already stated, the law separates Israel from other nations. The law is a gift to Israel from Yahweh, and it is a means to purity, holiness, and blessing. So that's what the Levitical laws discuss and what they emphasize. Are you guys good? All right. Now let's go to the laws of Deuteronomy. Laws of Deuteronomy. So this last collection of laws is found in Deuteronomy chapter 12 and goes all the way to Deuteronomy chapter 26. And they are a part of addresses given by Moses to the people while in Moab just before he dies. I put just because he dies. That should probably change. Just before Moses dies. Here's a pen. I'm going to do that before I forget. Sorry. Some of David's dog hair got on here. Unless if it was Joan's hair. It was something dark and long. I can't tell if it was Joan or if it was Maggie's. There we go. All right, so so these are a part of the addresses given by Moses to the people while he's in Moab, just before he dies. And just before Moses gives this collection, he actually first gives some sermons to the nation of Israel, and that's in Deuteronomy chapter 5 to 11. And after the collection of laws, we have the blessings and curses, and Moses' appeal for them to choose and obey the covenant. So, before the collection of laws, you have sermons that Moses does, and then after, you have the blessings and curses, and Moses' appeal to them to actually obey the laws in the covenant. The laws themselves are similar to the laws in Leviticus and in the book of the covenant. There is, of course, special concern in worshiping Yahweh, and it is a main theme in Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 18, and at the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 26. These laws also have a concern for justice and a desire to treat all people within the community well. There is much motivation within Moses' addresses to keep the law. Moses does not just want the people to know it, but to keep it as well. This would connect with the last of the Ten Commandments with the prohibition against coveting, which is a heart issue. It's not external like the other commandments. Moses wants the Torah upon the people's hearts, not just in their minds. God demands obedience in every facet, not just external, but also internal. And knowing this helps us connect the Torah with Jesus' interpretation of it in the Sermon on the Mount. The idea of the law being upon the Israel's hearts is a key to Jesus' teachings about it. The heart and the motive matter when we are trying to obey the law, right? Our heart and our motives do matter. And you can actually see this later on multiple times, but I just picked two verses. So the first is Hosea 6:6. I can find it. Here we go. Hosea 6:6, and I think you guys probably know this verse. If you don't recognize the reference, I think you guys will pick it up. For I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. And I'm sure outside of Hosea, I think it says in a couple other places very similar. And then also Micah 6:8, which some of you may even have memorized. He has told you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So the heart and the motive behind the obedience actually does matter, and it is a way of obedience, right? It kind of goes along with, my mom would always say, like, you're not supposed to grumble or complain, right, whenever you're trying to obey God or obey your parents, right, because that's actually a sign of disobedience. So even if you're externally doing it, right, if my mom told me to vacuum, right, if I was grumbling and complaining the whole time, I'm still technically sinning, even if I'm actually vacuuming.
Like the little boy whose mother told him to sit down and he wanted to stand up, or the other way around. But he said, I know you sitting down, but in my heart, I'm standing up.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. Or one of the things that I find interesting are like the Christian curse words. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, the substitutes. I'm like, I really don't think if your heart behind it is the same as when a person actually cusses, I don't think God is looking down saying, oh, good job, you didn't actually say the bad word. I'm like, I don't really think he's doing that. He's looking at your heart saying, it doesn't matter what word you said, you still sinned. And so I think people forget that the heart behind, right, and the motive behind your actions is just as important as the action itself. So, now, excuse me, these laws in Deuteronomy, they also deal with covenantal renewal. So if you remember, maybe you guys don't remember because you weren't here last week, but Deuteronomy is to the new generation of Israelites. All right, so when Moses is speaking in Deuteronomy, this is to the new generation of Israelites, and Moses is arguing for them to obey the laws and accept the covenant with Yahweh. They are a new generation that God is covenanting with, and these laws are the old laws. So it's not like he's adding really anything to the law. In fact, that actually says in Deuteronomy not to. But God is present with this new generation with the same laws and the same covenant. All right, so the new generation must not do what the old generation did. Another aspect of the laws is that the written law is fixed and it is authoritative. It is finished. There is no more adding to the law of Yahweh, like I just said, which is found in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2. And I'm going to read that for us. You shall not add to the word which I am commanding you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. And this is the idea of the written law. This idea of the written law, it goes back all the way to the Ten Commandments and the Book of the Covenant. God wrote the Ten Commandments personally. But now the law is finished. Do not add anything to it, but obey it. The principles within the Torah can be adaptable to new situations, but the laws themselves are not to be changed or added onto. And you actually see a little bit of the idea of the adaptableness of the law. If you remember, right, women couldn't inherit the law, but then that one man had multiple daughters. And so whoever they married, if it was outside the tribe, then that tribe would actually then inherit the land. And so they added the law that the daughters would marry, that the daughters could actually get the land, and they just had to marry within the tribe. That way the tribe wouldn't actually lose the land. And I think that's actually in Numbers. That might be more in, I think that's in Numbers. I don't think it's in Deuteronomy. Or I think it might actually be restated in Deuteronomy, but I think it's mainly in Numbers. But that's a, yeah. I know it comes up twice. I think one of them is Deuteronomy, but I think the original is at the end of Numbers, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong. Which wouldn't be the first time, but. So anyway, that's a picture of a law adapting, but not necessarily changing. Now, let's talk again a little bit about the Torah, or the whole law. So, many people divide the laws into three categories. There are the moral laws, the civil laws, and then the ceremonial laws. The moral laws, they deal with people. They are universal laws, like love your neighbor as yourself, or anything that can be found in the Ten Commandments. That's going to be an idea of the moral law. The civil laws, those are about the courts or economics, land, crime, punishment. It's about governing the nation of Israel. God gave them laws on how to govern themselves as a nation. All right, so those are the civil laws. It's about governing Israel, courts, economics, land, crime, those sorts of things. And then you have the ceremonial laws. These are going to be the laws that deal with the feasts, the festivals, the priestly acts. These laws told the Israelites when to have certain festivals and what sacrifices to do and certain things of that nature. So a lot of times the laws will be separated into those three categories as well. So let me know when you guys are done with that, and then we will go to, I believe, the conclusion. Are you guys good?
Got enough water?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really grateful that you gave that to me, because for some reason at night I start like running out of breath. Yeah, I start running out of steam, and I'm like, I need some water. And I forgot to get it this time. So.
That's why we always kept the water away from our pastures.
So they couldn't go over. Yeah. Well, you have more to. I don't usually go over. Now David, he'll go over. I usually stay right on time because I'm just as hungry as the rest of you. The Methodists aren't beating us. All right, we're gonna make it to Kablip. No, I'm just kidding. My old pastor at in Texas, Independent Baptist, he would make that joke. He's like, "We got to beat the Methodists to Golden Corral, so we're getting out on time." I think he might have copied it from Mark Lowry, because I think Mark Lowry actually said the same joke like on Broadway or something like that. And he was Southern Baptist, apparently. That's why he didn't dance. He sang that song. Instead of My Fair Lady, he sang like instead of I could have danced all night, right? He said, I cannot dance tonight because I'm Southern Baptist. I think he said, I can't go to Disneyland, I can't spread my wings or do any fun thing because I'm Southern Baptist. Like, I think he sang it on Broadway. No. Anyway, all right.
Seems like a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to the law and not talk about Mark Lowry. So, in conclusion, so the Torah continues the story of our redemption through the story of the Israelites. It was given as a blessing and a gift to Yahweh's chosen people. Through the law, they were to be separate from their neighbors and be an example to them. However, from the stories of the Bible, it is clear that no one can obey the Torah perfectly. It is impossible. The Torah consequently then reveals that mankind needs a Savior. We cannot obey God's laws perfectly and be holy through our actions of obedience, for we will disobey Yahweh. The law cannot save us. In fact, it shows us our weaknesses and it shows us our sins. Thus, we must look beyond the law for our salvation. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Love is perfection of the law.
That is true. Love is perfection of the law. It says if you love, then you will obey a lot of the law, right? If you love your neighbor and you love God. Unfortunately, we can't love all the time. We're not always loving.
It's no longer us, but the sin is dwell for us and fully fall.
Say that again?
It's no longer us, but it's no longer him, but the sin is dwelling.
Yeah, the sinful nature that's inside of us, yeah. It comes out. That's kind of the distinction. Because I think he says it right after, like, Romans chapter 5, where it says, like, we were of the old Adam, but now we're of the new Adam. And so we're not a slave to sin, but we still sin, obviously, because we're still in sinful nature.
God the new Adam because we're the new Eve, the bride.
I've never thought of it that way. It's, yeah. Does that mean we sin first? Yeah, that makes sense.
From death to life.
Yeah. All right.
According to the
All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So last week, the picture, because we talked about Moses, was Charlton Heston and holding the Ten Commandments. This week, though, I found a better Moses.
Oh, that reminds me.
So it says, thank you for giving us the law, Moses. I took this picture last week and I was like, I gotta do this. This is just perfect. I did. I should have gotten one of Jean too. She's technically a Moses, right? Like the even better Moses. I think it really is. I thought it actually turned out really good. You can see Bev in the background actually, if you like zoom in. But
I had my grandson who's adopted in the family. He didn't know that until he was what, 20, 30?
Oh.
Almost. And he got the information and it almost shattered him. Scott was not his dad. He said, it's the best dad I could